we're going to kind of go a little bit more in depth, and we're going to look at what happens when you are looking at two traits at the same time. So that's dihybrid. Di means two. We are looking at two traits at the same time. In this case, both parents are going to have this particular genotype. Okay, so you can see we're looking at two traits, right? The color of the seed and the texture of the seed. So the Y is, the big Y is yellow, and the little y is green. And for the trait that R calls for, big R is going to be smooth. And yellow R is the recessive trait, which is wrinkled. There you go. So now you need to figure out, all the possible alleles that each parent can contribute. Now, earlier, that's pretty easy, right? If a parent has, big A, little a, then the parent is going to contribute either a big A or a little a to the offspring, right? And the same thing for the other parent, and the offspring could be big A, big A. That makes sense, right? Because one of the chromosome comes from one of the parents, like we explained before. But what happens when you have two traits, when you have 4 letters at the same time? So this is how you can figure it out. So let's write it down. So both parents are big Y, big R, little r. Now you just need to figure out all the combinations between the 2 alleles of the 2 genes. That might be kind of hard to understand, but let me show you how to do it. So you are going to start with the big Y. So big Y could pair up with a big R, right? So that will give you big Y, big R. Big Y could also have a chance of ending up with the little r, right? So you'll have a big R, little r. And the same thing for the other, the little y, right? The little y could be with a big R, or it could end up with the little r, right? Little y, little r. So that's the 4 possible alleles that each parent could contribute to the offspring. So now you just need to write it out, all 4 possibilities. This is for parent 1, and parent 2, who has the same genotype, is going to have the 4 same gamete genotype. And then now you do the Punnett square, and you will notice that because you have 2 more choices, 2 more possibilities for each parent. So instead of a 4 square Punnett square, now you're going to have a 16 square Punnett square. And then again, you just do the same thing, right? You just put all the combinations here in each square. All right. Now I'm going to kind of leave it to you to fill in all the squares, and then you can compare your answer to the chart over here and see if your answer is correct, right? Whether you have correctly read out all the different combinations. Let's skip the genotypic ratios because I haven't seen any questions on genotypic ratios for dihybrid Punnett square. So we're just going to go straight to phenotype because this is something that TEAS may ask you about. And when you look at the phenotypic ratio, there is this 9:3 to 3:1 ratio. And it's pretty easy to remember because the highest number, this 9 number, that's the ratio for organisms that have 2 dominant traits. Or in another word, the dominant trait for both genes. It's going to be yellow for seed color, right? Dominant, and smooth for the texture, right? Which is also the dominant trait. And the 3 and 3, these 3 numbers will be referred to organisms that have only 1 trait being dominant. So this means 1 trait being dominant, the other trait being recessive. right? So this 3 number is green, which is recessive, right? So I'm just going to do dominant, recessive, dominant, recessive. So you can see green is recessive, but the other trait is going to be dominant, which is smooth. And same thing here for this group, the color is going to be dominant, which is yellow, but the texture is going to be recessive, right, which is wrinkled. And the last number, number 1, is individuals with both traits being recessive. So green and wrinkled. So that's pretty easy to remember, right? Highest number, individuals with both traits being dominant. And the 3 and the 3 are 2 groups of individuals with 1 trait being dominant, 1 trait being recessive. And then the last number is individuals with both traits being recessive. If I say we collected, 1,000 seeds and we plant all of them and they all grow to adult plants, how many of the plants are going to have green, smooth seeds? Okay, first thing you need to figure out, green is recessive, but smooth is dominant. So this is the group of individuals with 1 dominant trait, 1 recessive trait. So that's going to be the number 3 in the ratio, right? 3 divided by all the numbers added up. So 9 plus 3 plus 3 plus 1, that is going to be the percentage or proportion of this particular group individuals in the entire population, which is 1,000 plants. And then you can multiply this by the total number of plants, which is 1,000. That will give you the number of plants within the 1,000 plants that will have smooth and green seeds. If you understand this really well, move on. If you don't, let me find more room and I can kind of repeat what I just said, because I didn't have a lot of space to write this out. Okay, now you figure out that plants with green, which is recessive, and smooth seeds, smooth is dominant. So the plants are going to be in one of these groups, right? It will definitely have a number of 3 in the ratio. Now you just need to figure out the percentage or the proportion of this particular group of individuals within the entire population, which is 1,000 seeds, right? So if it counts for 3 squares, then the proportion or the percentage is going to be 3 divided by the total number of squares, right? Which is 16. Now you can double check by adding up all the numbers. 9 plus 3, that's 12, plus 3, that's 15, plus 1, that's a total of 16. That makes sense, right? You have a total of 16 squares, and 3 of the squares are plants with 1 dominant trait, 1 recessive trait. So basically the proportion of this particular group of plants is going to be 3 divided by the total of 16 squares, and you can calculate that number. This is 0.1875. So that means your prediction as to how many plants are going to have green smooth seeds is going to be this proportion 0.1875 multiplied by the total number of plants. So it's going to be 187.8. You can round it up, which is 188 plants. So approximately 188 of the 1,000 plants are going to have a green and smooth seeds. Okay, now what if I change this to, let's say, green and wrinkled seeds? So you can figure out green, wrinkled, they're both recessive traits, right? This particular group is going to have a 1 square, or that 1 in the ratio. 1 square divided by a total of 16 squares, and then multiply the total number of plants. So that's going to be how many plants that will have green and wrinkled seeds. So far, we have talked about the examples that follow Mendel's law of heredity, right? But nature is not that straightforward. It's not that simple. We do observe a lot of traits that do not follow Mendel's law of heredity. So we're gonna kind of just touch on a few non-Mendelian inheritance, just in case TEAS has questions for those. TEAS, the study menu did mention that there might be questions where you have to kind of differentiate Mendelian inheritance and non-Mendelian inheritance, and with the numbers and information provided in the question, identify whether this is a trait that follows Mendelian inheritance or not. For non-Mendelian inheritance, we have incomplete dominance. In this case, there's no dominant trait or recessive trait. When you have a heterozygous genotype, let's say big R W, and you're gonna ask, why is this not little r, but big W? Remember, little r or any lowercase letters represent recessive traits, right? But in this case, it does not follow dominant recessive trait because this is incomplete dominance. So to avoid confusion and to differentiate between the two types of inheritance, normally we use different letters for different alleles. Letter R codes for red color. Letter W codes for white color. So when you have a heterozygous genotype, R and W, that's going to produce an intermediate trait. The incomplete dominance trait in this case is going to be a color that's in between red and white, right? And that will be probably pink, right? So any plants that have this heterozygous genotype is going to be pink flowers. So in incomplete dominance, you have three possible genotypes. You have RR, that's going to be plants with red flowers. RW, that's going to be plants with the pink flowers. And WW, that's going to be plants with white flowers. So that's all the possible genotypes and corresponding phenotypes. So you can see this is different than what we talked about before that follows Mendelian genetics, right? In those cases, we have big R, that will be red, but heterozygous genotype is going to be big R, little r, right? And that's going to be red flower. And then we have little r, and that's going to be white flower. So you can compare dominance and incomplete dominance, and you can see the difference is about the heterozygous genotype, right? In incomplete dominance, you're gonna get an intermediate trait. So nobody is dominant over anybody else, right? They all contribute, and then they produce something in between. The second type of inheritance that does not follow Mendel's law is codominance. That's when both alleles dominant. So they're going to co-dominant, and they're both going to be expressed in the offspring. For example, people with allele A and allele B for blood type is going to have type A, B blood because both alleles show, right? So they will both generate their corresponding antigens on red blood cells. So you're going to both have antigen A and antigen B on red blood cells, and that's what determines that you're going to have type A, B blood. Now, this is important. TEAS specifically points out that students should know how to distinguish Mendelian inheritance from non-Mendelian inheritance. And you're going to have to remember the ratios that we talk about from Mendelian inheritance. Remember that 3:1 ratio for monohybrid. So big A, little a, and then the other parent is also heterozygous, big A, little a. Or the 9:3:1 ratio. That's when the parents are heterozygous for both genes, right? Big A, little a, could be big B, little b. The other parents have the same thing. In TEAS, that they're assuming that these, that these numbers refer to when both parents are heterozygous for the particular gene. If the ratio is 3:1, if you're looking at one trait, or 9:3 to 3:1, if you're looking at two traits, then this trait does follow Mendelian inheritance. So I'll give you an example. So let's say that both parents are heterozygous. Both, heterozygous, big A, little a. And then they produce 100 offspring. And you're going to get, let's say, 50 with the dominant trait, which is tall, and 50, which is short. Okay. So now it's going to ask you whether inheritance for this particular gene follows Mendelian inheritance. So 50 of the offspring is tall, 50 is short. So that means the ratio is 50 to 50 is 1:1, right? Now, if this follows Mendelian inheritance, when both parents are heterozygous, the ratio should be 3:1, right? 3:1 and not 1:1. So this does not follow Mendelian inheritance. Okay, now what if I change this to 75 over here and 25 over here? Then after you do the calculation, 75 to 25, that's a 3:1, right? So this follows Mendelian genetics. Now, when you do real experiments, the number of offspring that have a particular trait might not be exactly 75 or 25. Okay, so this could be 72 and this could be 28. Now, when you do the calculation, this is approximately, if you change the 72 and 28, it's approximately 3:1. So you would consider this as following the 3:1 ratio. So again, if it's just a little bit off, that's totally okay, because the real data are often different than theoretical data. Therefore, if the number is, a few numbers off, don't, get too bogged down on that. It's okay, because you are looking for that approximate ratio. Okay, now let's look at some practice problems. A pea plant has a genotype of a big T for stem height. This pea plant is big T, same alleles. And the allele is written in capital letter. So that's going to be homozygous dominant. Correct answer is B. Number 2, a pea plant with a genotype of big T little t crosses with a pea plant of little t. So, highlight the genotypes of the parents. What do you predict regarding the genotype and phenotype of the offspring? So do the Punnett square. Put big T, little t here, little t, oops, little t, little t. I'll do it as fast as I can. Okay, there you go. So you can see the ratio of both phenotype and genotype is going to be 1:1, right? Or 50% to 50%. So all offspring will be big T, little t. That's not right, right? Half the offspring are going to be little t. So that's not right. All offspring will be homozygous. No. So these offspring will be homozygous, but these offspring, big T, little t, they are going to be heterozygous. So only half of them are going to be homozygous. Offspring may be tall or short. That's correct. And the ratio of tall to short is 3:1. That's not right, right? We just calculated this. It should be 50-50. So it's a ratio of 1:1. D, offspring tall or short, that's correct. The ratio would be 1:1. So that's the correct answer. Number 3, a student performed an experiment where she crossed a heterozygous red flower. So highlight the key information, heterozygous, and this is red flower. The second parent is also heterozygous, red flower. She gathered the 50 seeds and planted them. She obtained 37 red flower plants and 13 white flower plants. Which of the following statements is likely true based on the experiment results? Now, this is what I talked about earlier. where you need to be able to differentiate or distinguish whether this particular trait follows Mendelian genetics or not, using the numbers, using the experimental numbers. So first of all, you know that both parents are heterozygous, and we're just looking at one trait, right? The color of the flower. So this is going to be about monohybrid. And you immediately have to think about the ratio for monohybrid, which is 3:1 ratio. All right, now let's do the calculation. So 37 red flower, 13 white. So the ratio for red to white is 37:13, right? I do a little bit calculation. I think on a TEAS test, you can, they do provide digital calculators through the computer. And you can calculate the ratio is about 3:1. Now I cheated a little bit because I know that 3 times 13 is about 39, and 39 is very close to 37, right? So the ratio is approximately 3:1. So this means this particular trait, the color of the flower, does follow the Mendelian law of heredity. So the correct answer is B. Now, we know the ratio is not 1:1 because you did calculation 37:13. There's no way that's 1:1 ratio, because that will be either 37:37 or 13:13, right? That's a big no-no. Non-Mendelian, we just talked about that. It seems to be 3:1 ratio, so it follows Mendelian laws. Now, number A, red flower is likely to be a recessive trait? No, because more offspring have red flower than white flower. So chances are the red flower is going to be the dominant trait, and the white flower is going to be the recessive trait. Okay, we're done with Mendel's law of heredity.